The Castro Revolution versus the Mexican Revolution. The Castro Revolution lasted between 1956 to 1959, compared to the Mexican Revolution, which lasted from 1910 to 1920. Fidel Castro Ruz was born on August 13, 1926, on a farm in the eastern province of Cuba. His father was a poor farmer. Fidel's youth was strongly influenced by the hard life of the poor, illiterate people in Cuba. The ideas for the revolution was the education of the illiterate farmers, the health care, and originated from the misery he witnessed during his youth. Just like in the Mexican Revolution, two revolutionary leaders, Emiliano Zapata and Pancho Villa, was also exposed to poverty in their early childhoods. The Cuban Revolution began when the poorly armed rebels attacked the Moncada barracks in Santiago and the barracks in Bayamo on July 26, 1953. The followers of Emiliano Zapata and Pancho Villa were also poor villagers trying to earn back land that was taken from them by the government and the Roman Catholic Church. Fidel Castro and his brother Raul Castro Ruz were captured shortly after the attack of the Moncada barracks. Fidel Castro spoke for nearly 4 hours in his defense, ending with the words, "Condemn me. It does not matter. History will absolve me." Fidel Castro was sentenced to 15 years in prison. Pancho Villa was accused by Huerta for stealing a horse, so he was sentenced to prison and remained there from June 1912 to December 27, 1912, when he escaped from prison.
In 1955, under broad political pressure, the Batista regime freed all political prisoners in Cuba, including the Moncada attackers. Batista was persuaded to include the Castro brothers in this release, in part by Fidel's Jesuit childhood teachers. The Castro brothers joined with other exiles in Mexico to prepare a revolution to overthrow Batista, receiving training from Alberto Bello, a leader of Republican forces in the Spanish Civil War. Fidel met and joined forces with Ernesto Che Guevara during this period. The Groma arrived in Cuba on December 2, 1956. It arrived in Cuba 2 days later than planned. This dashed any hopes for a coordinated attack with the ANO wing of the movement. After arriving and exiting the ship, the band of rebels began to make their way into the Sierra Maestra Mountains, a range in southeastern Cuba. 3 days after the trek began, Batista's army attacked and killed most of the Groma participants, but a small number escaped. There were initially bloody encounters with the Cuban army, and the revolutionists succeeded in fleeing the Sierra Maestra Mountains. The group of survivors included Fidel Castro, Che Guevara, Raul Castro, and Camilo Cienfuegos. Eventually the men would link up again with the help of peasant sympathizers and would form the core leadership of the guerrilla army. The main military tactics used during the Mexican Revolution was guerrilla warfare. During the Mexican Revolution in June of 1914, Huerta sent a massive force to hold the town of Zacatecas from the relentless advance of Pancho Villa and his legendary Division of the North, which was probably the most formidable army that those arrayed against him. Villa's decisive victory at Zacatecas devastated the Federal Army and marked the beginning of the end for Huerta. This battle was known as Battle of Zacatecas. The Battle of Celaya during the Mexican Revolution took place in April 1915. This battle was a decisive military engagement in the wars between revolutionary factions, one of the largest and bloodiest battles in the Mexican history. It was fought at Celaya, Guanajuato State, between the forces of Obregón and Pancho Villa. In the course of the civil wars, Carranza and Villa had eclipsed the other revolutionary leaders, and Obregón supported Carranza. After 2 deadly assaults, Villa's cavalry, the most formidable contingent among the revolutionary armies, failed to capture Obregón's positions, which were protected by trenches, barbed wire, and machine guns. His forces decimated and Villa retreated. On March 13, 1957, a separate group of revolutionaries, the Student Anti-Communist Revolutionary Directorate, stormed the presidential palace in Havana, attempting to assassinate Batista and decapitate the regime. The attack was suicidal. On August 21, 1958, after the defeat of the Batista offensive, Castro's forces began their own offensive in the Oriente province. The Oriente provinces were the area of Santiago de Cuba, Granma, Guatemala, and Holguin. Descending from the mountains with new weapons captured during the offensive and smuggled in by planes, Castro's forces won a series of victories. Castro's major victory at Guasa and the successful capture of several towns including Mapo, Contramuestra, and Central Oriente brought the Cotto plans under his control.
Castro learned of Batista's flight in the morning and immediately started negotiations to take over Santiago de Cuba. On January 2nd, the military commander in the city, Colonel Rubido, ordered his soldiers not to fight, and Castro's forces took over the city. The forces of Guevara and Cienfuegos entered Havana at about the same time. They had met no opposition on their journey from Santa Clara to Cuba's capital. Castro himself arrived in Havana on January 8th after a long victory march. His choice for president, Manuel Leo, took office on the 3rd. Castro claimed head of the revolution which placed him above the president during that time.
During the Castro Revolution, Batista was the only president in power. But during the Mexican Revolution, there were several presidents that took power during that period. The Mexican Revolution had problems with national unity since they went through many presidents, and this created confusion for the people because the country needed dominant leadership to fix the issues that the country was facing. The causes of both the Mexican Revolution and the Castro Revolution came from the want for change in the peasant life. Revolutionary leaders from both revolutions wanted land reform, standard of living reform, and economic reform to occur for the peasants. The triumph of Fidel Castro's guerrilla army over the Batista regime did something that the Mexican Revolution did not. Castro broke up old state apparatus by demolishing its instrument of power. The Mexican Revolution did improve certain aspects, but only progressed in democratic reforms and deprived possessions of the big landowners. The Mexican Revolution and the Castro Revolution experienced United States involvement, which led to a dependence on the United States economy for stable jobs and a stable economy. By advancing the agriculture, put the lower class suffering from poverty out of work. The land was expensive due to marketing and market booms. Both the Castro Revolution and the Mexican Revolution did not have a middle class. The people were exposed to lower class and upper class only. At the end of the Castro Revolution, 4 revolutionary leaders were left to take over Cuba: Fidel Castro, Che Guevara, Raúl Castro, and Camilo Cienfuegos. Unfortunately, 2 of the main revolutionary leaders during the Mexican Revolution died before they could see what progress they had made with the role of the peasants and the power of the government. The 2 revolutionary leaders that died during the Mexican Revolution were Emiliano Zapata and Pancho Villa. These 2 folk heroes never had the chance to see the impact they really had upon Mexico and the Mexican people. The Castro brothers quickly consolidated their power, sweeping away all remnants of the Batista regime and muscling out all of the rival rebel groups that had aided them in their rise to power. Raúl Castro and Che Guevara were put in charge of organizing squad to bring to trial and execute Batista-era war criminals who had engaged in torture and murder under the old regime. In both the Castro Revolution and the Mexican Revolution, the revolutionaries were inspired by the maltreatment of the peasants and the extreme need for land reform. In Mexico and Cuba, during the time Castro was involved, the 2 countries were not prospering in the economy life and the social life. Revolutionaries in both wars can be said to be similar because they came about reform for the same reasons. Zapata and Villa are very similar to Castro and his fellow revolutionary leaders. The Mexican Revolution lasted longer than the Castro Revolution for mainly one reason. During the Mexican Revolution, there were several presidents, but during the Castro Revolution, there was only Batista. So it could be said that there are many similarities between the 2 revolutionaries, and that comes from the fact that the revolution usually calls for a social and economic reform, and so it came about in both countries. The differences were small in comparison to the similarities, but the most relevant difference was the longevity of the revolution.